Hey everybody, today I'm out in Sonoma, California with two of Hyundai's latest performance vehicles. Over here in Performance Periwinkle, we have the new Elantra N. This is not the focus of this video. Instead, we're going to be talking about this very red car right here. This is the all-new Kona N. If you want to know more about my Periwinkle partner, be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen, because this video is on the channel live at the same time as this video. Without further ado, let's dive right into the Kona. With the addition of the Kona N to the Hyundai lineup, Hyundai now has three performance vehicles in America: the Elantra N, the Kona N, and the Veloster N for 2022. Now, we don't know what 2023 is going to be like. I wouldn't be surprised if the Veloster N sailed off into the sunset, because honestly, the Kona N is a better N car. It's not as raw, it's not as visceral as the Veloster N, but it fits a lot of the performance philosophies that Hyundai constantly talks about better. This is a daily driver livable vehicle that's also an awful lot of fun on an autocross. The rest of the Kona lineup was refreshed last year, and the Kona N receives a lot of those same tweaks. We have full LED headlights. These are LED reflector modules. They're down here. And then we have an accent light right on top. No fog lights below because extra cooling is required for the N engine, and of course brake cooling and some extra aero treatments up front. The grille is a little bit different, and we get a blacked out Hyundai badge. One thing that I've always found odd, this little area up here is not a vent at all. Personally, I think it would have been a slightly cleaner look if that had just been eliminated. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. In case you're wondering, the rest of the N lineup has red accents all around the body, but if you get the red paint job, those red accents disappear. Probably the most important thing to know about the Kona N is that this is a subcompact crossover, and all-wheel drive is not offered if you choose the N Performance engine. So if you're looking for all-wheel drive, or you're looking for something a little bit roomier on the inside, you might need to look elsewhere. The Elantra N is a little bit faster 0 to 60, it's a little bit lighter than this, but it's also a little bit longer than this, and it does have more combined legroom. But Hyundai was really clear that they were after something a little bit different with the Kona N. They were after cargo practicality. So this has the same hatch that we find in the regular Kona model. It also has roof rails. And rather than slamming the Kona N all the way to the ground and making essentially a 5-door version of the Veloster, they chose to keep its exact same ground clearance as the non-N model. But it's important to keep the Kona N's size in mind, because this is a subcompact vehicle, and something like a Volkswagen Golf R or Golf GTI, they're a little bit wider than this, since technically they're compacts. In my mind, Golf comparisons make a lot of sense for the Kona N. Price-wise, this is probably going to be somewhere within the price range of the Volkswagen GTI, although importantly, Hyundai has yet to give us detailed pricing information. This is probably going to be somewhere between $31,000 and $33,000 starting, likely very similar to the current generation Veloster N. Out back, we get a lot of N treatments, mainly the lower portion of the bumper there with the air diffusers, big exhaust tips there, a distinctive spoiler added on to the top, and then the triangular brake light right there in the middle. But as you'd expect, there are also a lot of shared components with the rest of the Kona lineup. Tail lamp modules, turn signal modules, those are basically the same, and the hatch design is generally the same as the regular Kona as well. No performance vehicle would be complete without upgraded tires and brakes. Of course, we have those on the Kona N also. Unique wheels here, wrapped in 235 40R19 summer tires right from the factory, and big brakes. These are the same performance brakes that we find in the Elantra N. Importantly, these are not Brembo brakes, because Hyundai said that they wanted to use a similar design to other Hyundai vehicles in order to help reduce costs. Not just for you to buy the Kona N, but for you to maintain the Kona N also. So aftermarket, it's going to be easier to find brake components, and it's going to be less expensive if you need to replace things like calipers or brake pads in the future. The rotor design is a pretty large, just over 14-inch rotor up front, and we get a ventilated rotor in the back that's larger than the regular Kona's brakes. Under the hood, we have the same engine found in the Veloster N and the Elantra N. This is a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo that produces 276 horsepower, up to 286 horsepower for 20 seconds in overboost mode. The overboost mode is standard on the Kona N because the dual-clutch transmission is standard in this vehicle. The 8-speed DCT is the same 8-speed that we find in the Veloster and the Elantra. It's a little bit different than Hyundai's other 8-speed dual-clutch transmissions because it has a much more aggressive starting ratio and more aggressive ratios in general. It's also tuned to shift faster and a little bit harsher than the rest of the lineup to give you the most brutal acceleration possible. As with the rest of the N product line in America, this is front-wheel drive only. If you're looking for an all-wheel drive performance vehicle, you might have to look at something like the Golf R, although it will be more expensive than the Kona. On the other hand, if you're looking for a more comfortable driver's seat, definitely keep the Kona N on your shopping list, because this has a power driver's seat of a different design than we find in the Veloster N or the Elantra N, where those seats are actually quite similar. The power seat in this model is heavier than the seat in the Elantra N or the Veloster N, which increases the curb weight of the Kona N, but personally I think that's a small price to pay for a much more comfortable seat design. It's also worth noting that the bolster design is a little bit different in here. I'll talk about that later, but if you're a slightly larger person than I am and you're looking for something a bit more comfortable, a bit more accommodating, you might want to take a look at this yet again. On the other hand, the Kona is a subcompact vehicle, so we find considerably less legroom in here than we find in the Elantra. But we do have a bit more headroom. If I put my head all the way back there to the headrest, I still have about an inch of headroom left. Plenty of room, even if I sit in this middle seat. On the other hand, if I had this passenger seat all the way back in its tracks, I could not sit behind it. This is the kind of vehicle where if you're a shorter person up front, maybe you could put a child seat in the back, but rear-facing child seats would definitely be tricky. Also, the rear bench is narrower than the one that we find in the Elantra. So if you are interested in a Hyundai performance vehicle as a daily driver for family situations, you might want to take a look at the Elantra over the Kona because it's going to have a more accommodating back seat for kids. When designing the Kona N, Hyundai was really upfront that they wanted this to be the cargo practical N model, and it really shows because we have more cargo room than you'll find in the Veloster and a more practical cargo area than you'll find in the Elantra N. In the Elantra N, it has a 100% folding seat back, so all three rear seat positions fold as one unit, and there's a chassis brace in the rear, and that means that you cannot put larger items from the cargo area into the inside unless it's something about the size of a ski. But this is the kind of vehicle where if you want to get a barbecue, you can just toss it right here in the back, and then if you want to go autocrossing on the weekend, you can take out the barbecue and do that. Under the load floor, we find a bit of additional divided storage space. You can also remove that foam divider and have access to even more storage back here. There is a mount point for a compact spare tire back here, but the compact spare that you'll find on the regular Kona model, it won't fit over the brakes. Although I suspect you would be able to fit a full-size spare tire under the load floor if you wanted to try that yourself aftermarket. Now let's go for a quick spin around the Kona N's interior. If you want a moonroof, you're going to have to look at the Elantra N. The Kona N does not offer one. This again comes only in one way, exactly as we're looking at it in this video. We do have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and a different N seat design than we find in the Veloster N and the Elantra N. Hyundai says that with the Kona N, they're targeting a slightly different shopper, someone that's more used to the typical compact or subcompact crossover, so we have a seat that's a little bit more like the one that we find in the regular Kona. It has pretty aggressive bolstering on the seat back cushions right up here in the shoulder area as well. We have the embossed N logo right there in the middle of the seat back, and it's a combination of imitation leather and imitation suede. Lots of blue accents going on there. Pretty moderate bolstering on the seat bottom cushions. I think this should be more comfortable for larger folks than something like a Volkswagen Golf R. Moving over to the front doors, the front door design is pretty similar to the rest of the Kona lineup. Since this is a subcompact crossover, you should expect to see some more hard plastics here than you'd find in a Hyundai Tucson. Moving over to the dashboard general design is basically the same as the rest of the Kona lineup for 2022. Some hard plastics up above on the dashboard, soft plastics right here in the middle with definitely a distinctive texture there. Round air vents, pretty decently sized glove compartment. I had no problem fitting a 10-inch tablet computer inside. We have Hyundai's touchscreen infotainment system here in the middle of the dashboard with obviously some N mode changes. Let's go take a look at those right now. We have this home screen for the N mode with lots of different pop-out options. So I can click the throttle option and get a gauge readout right there like that. I can click this option out, make it bigger on the screen. We can also do things like lap timers. We have lots of circuit information. Circuits are programmed into the system. So for instance, if you want to do Lime Rock Park, Homestead Miami, Speedway, Atlanta Motorsports Park, etc. Of course, one thing interesting about this is that I'm at Sonoma Raceway right now with Hyundai, and Sonoma Raceway is not one of the tracks on there. We also have a brake press readout there, so you can see how much brake force you're giving. The second N page on the infotainment system is perhaps the most interesting because this is where we can adjust the custom drive modes. You can either adjust them on this page in this format with a little scroll area there on the left, or we can adjust them right here on this page with a little graphic, so you can just click that, get the 3 different levels of engine, 3 different levels of steering, suspension, transmission, exhaust sound, etc. If you want a quieter exhaust sound, you can pop that down to normal. This does have an actual active exhaust system. This button here to turn on launch control. This G-force gauge pops out just like some of those other gauges there. Again, you can collapse things over there on the right side if you want to. If we go into performance options, there are a number of other things that can be changed. For instance, you can adjust the way launch control functions, the RPM right there, whether or not you want the shift light on, and power shift is an interesting option. If we turn this on, then it's not going to basically blip throttle a little bit between gear changes. It makes the gear changes faster, improves acceleration, but it gives up a little bit in the sound. In track sense shift, that's kind of a mouthful there, that detects when you're on a track and engages the appropriate program. We can turn the automatic creep off, where the dual clutch transmission tries to imitate basically an automatic transmission that can be enabled or disabled there. Aside from those options, the rest of the infotainment system is exactly the same as the rest of Hyundai's latest lineup. We have some physical buttons and knobs down there below, 2 large air vents, engine start-stop button there, controls for the single-zone automatic climate control system, USB input, G wireless charging mat right there, heated seat controls, the distinctive N shifter that's basically the same as we find in the Elantra with the drive mode selector over there on the left side, 2 decently sized cup holders, and a handbrake, which is a nice touch, a nice high armrest, a little bit different from the Elantra as well, pretty deep storage area right there inside. On the driver's side, we have an adjustable LCD instrument cluster. The design of this will change either based on the drive mode or based on your selection in the infotainment system. This is approximately 10¼ inches large, so it is a little bit smaller than some of the LCD instrument clusters that we find out there, and it's nestled into a binnacle that makes it look a little bit smaller than the screen to the right, but they're actually at the same size screen. One is just a little bit further away from the driver. The steering wheel is the same N steering wheel that we find in the Veloster and the Elantra. It has pretty thick grips up top, blue stitching all the way around, perforated leather section right there. Paddle shifters on the back if you get the dual clutch model. The N programmable buttons on the left and the right for the 2 different customizable drive modes. If you get the dual clutch transmission, we get this NGS button. That's N grin shift, kind of an odd name there. It gives you overboost and adjusts the way the transmission and engine behave to give you best acceleration. If you get the manual transmission option, that turns into a rev matching enable disable button. Now let's get the Kona N out on the road. When you're not using launch control, 0 to 60 takes about 0.3 of a second longer than normal. The Kona N, again, is available only with the 8-speed wet dual clutch transmission. So if you want a 6-speed manual, you're gonna have to get the Veloster N at the moment or the new Elantra N. Those 2 will offer the manual transmission. This is gonna be DCT only. And to be perfectly honest, most folks that are buying an N performance vehicle are going to be getting the DCT because it will get you 0 to 60 faster, and this transmission is absolutely excellent. It is just as good as the 7-speed dual clutch transmission that we find in modern Volkswagens and modern Audi products that are front-wheel drive. This is really, really good out on the road. It's smooth, it's easy to drive, and out on a track, it's even better. But I'll get to that at the end of this drive section. The mission with the Kona N was to make this the most livable version of the N product line so far. This is tuned perhaps a little bit softer, just a hair softer than we find in the Veloster N. Now obviously you can firm things up if I toggle the style over here to Sport, or if I use the custom modes to engage Sport Plus for the suspension. Things are definitely firmer, the engine exhaust note is more raucous, etc. But if I move this control over to Eco or Normal, this is very daily driver livable. And that's also something that we see in Volkswagen's GTI and the Golf R. The 8-speed dual clutch transmission has a lot to do with the drivability and livability of the Kona N. This wet dual clutch transmission feels less like a manual transmission than the dry clutch transmissions that Hyundai has used in the past. Since the clutches inside this transmission are swimming in an oil bath, it's easier for the transmission to slip the clutches and give you a more automatic transmission-like start. But there's still times that this transmission will feel like a manual transmission, most notably when you're engaging the paddle shifters. The shifts are very rapid. You'll also really notice it when you've engaged the sportier modes like the N grin shift mode, because the shifts are very quick and they're very, very abrupt. Hyundai says that one of their missions with the N grin shift function was not to make the vehicle sound the best, but to give you better performance. So in N grin shift mode, the shifts are going to be even faster than normal. Apparently in regular drive modes, Hyundai was a little bit more focused on some of the extra, more visceral components of driving rather than simply speed. So if you're in the regular drive modes, the throttle is going to lift off ever so slightly between shifts to give you that distinctive pop and burble out the back. But if you're in N grin shift mode, not only do we have the overboost function, but it also reduces that a little bit, so that way throttle is on a little bit higher and a little bit longer in the shift, and that way gives you the best acceleration possible. Rather unfortunately, I don't have my testing equipment with me, and I am of course not at home, even though I am close to home, so I don't have official 0 to 60 times for this or 60 to 0 stopping scores. But according to Hyundai, this should go 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds, just a little bit slower than the Elantra N because this is just a tad heavier. I do have nice features like this power driver seat with the 2-way adjustable lumbar support. That's something that I really appreciate, and probably one of the reasons that I might get this over the Elantra N. But enough with the on-road talking, let's talk about how this behaves on a track, and more importantly, on an autocross course. Unfortunately, on this racetrack, the windows have to be down up front according to the rules, so let's do a voiceover. As with the Elantra N that I was also driving the same day as the Kona N, I'm not entirely clear that Sonoma Raceway is the right kind of track for the Kona N because it is a little on the large side, and versus 400-500 horsepower sports cars, the Kona N and the Elantra N can feel ever so slightly out of breath. But where this really shines is the Autocross. Although I don't have too many shots of the Kona N on the Autocross course, I did end up spending most of my time behind the wheel on the autocross course because it is so much fun. Obviously, the first thing you're going to notice is that it is front heavy and front wheel drive. But the same thing can be said of most of the performance options in this price category, whether we're talking about a Golf R or a Golf GTI or the upcoming Honda Civic Type R. The fact that we can talk about a subcompact crossover in the same sentence as those other options should really tell you something about how the Kona N performs. Hyundai's decision to not lower the vehicle, again this has about the same kind of ground clearance as we find in the regular Kona, and Hyundai's decision to not delete some of the more luxury features that you find on the inside, like the electric power driver's seat, etc., means that it does feel a little bit heavier and a little bit top heavier, I guess you could say, versus the Elantra N. This also is a slightly older generation Hyundai platform, and the Elantra N is riding on the latest compact platform from Hyundai. So if you were hoping the Kona N would feel like an Elantra N or a Veloster N on an autocross course or out on the track, you may be a teeny bit disappointed. Instead, Hyundai was going after something just a little bit different. They were trying to make this the most fun you could have in a subcompact crossover or a subcompact hatch. Again, whatever you want to call this, whatever you want to cross-shop this. I admit to being a little bit sad about the lack of all-wheel drive in the Kona N, but it is a pretty rational decision from Hyundai in order to help keep costs low and make this as fun as possible. Now, the torque vectoring front axle really is an interesting twist with the Kona N. Once you get used to it, and once you're willing to just dig deeper into the throttle, you will really notice it on the autocross course, because if you're digging into a corner and you're just on the brakes, you could end up plowing through the cones. But if you're willing to let your foot off the brake pedal and just put it on the gas pedal instead, especially if you downshift, then you'll be rewarded by the front tires really scrabbling around the corner, pulling you through the corner faster than you thought it could. The active front differential is a really unique feature of the Kona N, and it makes the vehicle feel an awful lot more engaging and an awful lot more capable in some of these performance maneuvers, especially versus some of the competition that simply has more of a traditional limited slip differential up front. It's not going to have that same torque vectoring ability, that ability to claw you around a corner that we find in the Kona N. But again, the Kona N does have a slightly higher curb weight, and the weight is positioned a little bit higher in the vehicle than the Elantra N or the Veloster N, so if you're looking for the absolute in performance, you might want to take a look at those other two options. But I think that the practicality and the blend of features in the Kona N really make this an intriguing option. If you want to get your hands on the new Kona N, reach out to your Hyundai dealer today because these will be on sale very shortly. Unfortunately, the one thing that I do not know when it comes to the Kona N is how much it's going to cost. Hyundai has been uncharacteristically vague when it comes to the Kona N's price tag, also the Elantra N's price tag. But based on what they have said, I expect it's going to be somewhere between $31,000 and $33,000. They've basically said reference the Veloster N's price tag and prepare to be pleasantly surprised with the price tag on the Kona N and the Elantra N. That means that this should be within the pricing range of the Golf lineup in the United States. But it's not quite the same thing, because this does have more ground clearance than we find in the Golf. It doesn't have all-wheel drive like we find in the Golf R, but its price tag is probably going to be closer to the Golf GTI. And compared to the GTI, this is a bit more of a dedicated performance vehicle. Not only does it have more power, it has more features on board, like the adaptive suspension system being standard, whereas it's optional on the GTI. You won't find a warranty as long in that Volkswagen as you'll find in the Hyundai, and most likely repair and maintenance parts for this vehicle are going to be less expensive as well over time. But the two things that make comparisons truly tricky are the fact that we don't have all-wheel drive in this like we find in the Golf R, and the fact that this is still a subcompact crossover, not a compact crossover or a compact sedan or compact hatch. And that means that at the moment, this really stands alone in a segment all to itself. As always, hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. I will update you with a full and complete review of the new Kona N just as soon as I can get my hands on one. But at the moment, I have to say, Hyundai has made making a decision very difficult because they have three excellent performance vehicles in the US. If you want the most raw, most visceral option, that's going to be the Veloster N, as long as it sticks around. If you want something that's a little bit more comfortable, perhaps a little bit more practical, that's going to be the Kona N. And if you want a family-friendly middle option with 4 doors and a big back seat, that's the new Elantra N. In the meantime, be sure and find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, Instagram, all those other social places, and of course, check out the merch store at AOAmerch.com. I'll see all of you next week.